The Defense Ministry says it cannot guarantee the safe return of 2,900 soldiers deployed to the DRC earlier this month. Two of the soldiers who died in the conflict were repatriated on Wednesday, and their remains were officially handed to their families. They will be laid to rest this coming weekend. In light of security questions around the military deployees, the ministry has reiterated that despite the concern, the soldiers are well equipped for war zones. For more on this, we now are joined by the Director of the African Defense Review, that is Darren Olivier. Darren, good morning. Thank you so much for making time for us. What do you make of the sentiments that were expressed by the Minister on Wednesday that the soldiers are well equipped, and also attacking people that are saying that actually they're also not well trained?
Good morning. So I think the training isn't the real issue here. Generally speaking, these are good troops. They have the training required. The problem we have, though, is they are not really equipped for this task. You know, there's always some risk when deploying, but the question needs to be asked, is the level of risk reasonable or necessary given what's being faced? Now, M23 is a highly resurgent group. They have rebuilt, they are well trained themselves, they're also well equipped, and they're quite large in numbers, and they are backed by Rwanda. So they're not just an easy or simple or unequipped group to take on. In the meantime, the SADF deployment, and in fact the deployment of the other troops in the mission, is mostly light infantry. They don't have all equipment they need. They don't have Royal Folks, Oryxes, or similar assets. They don't have drone equipment to guard against that. They don't have, as far as I can tell, systems to protect against mortars or rockets or artillery. So really, I think I disagree completely with the Minister when it comes to trying to say that they do have the right gear to be there and to be safe.
Yeah. So considering that when there is a deployment, it needs to go through Parliament as well, is there anything that Parliament can do to prevent the deployment of soldiers, considering, as the opposition have pointed out as well, and now you're pointing this matter out as well, is that they are not well equipped? Is there anything that that Parliament as an oversight mechanism can do to prevent further fatalities in the DRC?
So I think the first thing to raise is that Parliament does not have the right to stop a deployment before it happens. They are informed after it happens, a certain number of days after, and then have the ability to stop the deployment if they believe it necessary. That would require the agreement of the majority of the relevant Committee on Defence, which so far I think does not appear to have that desire or will. So Parliament is not part of the chain of decisions before deploying forces. Again, the issue here, though, is there's not much agreement in terms of what level of risk is sustainable. So I think what needs to happen first is this public debate as to, well, when and how and why can we deploy the SANDF? What level of risk do we regard as reasonable, and what level of risk is unreasonable? How important is this mission to us? And if it's that important, which I believe it is, what can we do to ensure that the troops are properly equipped for the task? And for that, I think we need more debate and more transparency from government.
Yeah. So just quickly paint a picture for us, Darren. There they are in the eastern parts of the DRC. They are at their base. And considering that this is also part of the SADC mission deployment, this particular deployment, would they be able to use the equipment from other countries in SADC that have also been deployed as part of this mission? How does it work?
Yes, absolutely. So the entire mission is approximately 5,000 troops in size. So it's Africa, Tanzania, and Malawi. And in theory, they are all a mixed force. So any part of the force can rely on other parts of the force's equipment. However, it is not always that easy to do cross-national missions and operations. We certainly don't, I think, train enough for it. There's some experience gained from being part of the FIB and the UN mission together, but it isn't quite the same thing as large combined operations of this scale. So I do think it is possible, and certainly the Tanzanians have artillery deployed, which could help, but it's not easy, and there hasn't been enough training in terms of training with them in the use of that. So I think that's it's available, but it isn't optimal and isn't as good as having equipment with you available. And also, they also don't have many of the same areas, the same things which we lack, such as air defense.
Yeah. So could that be one of the reasons why the minister is so confident that there isn't a reliance on our neighbors and their equipment? To some level, at least.
I don't think it can be, because, for example, one of the key things that is lacking is the use of air support. And our neighbors haven't provided that and won't provide that to the mission, as far as we can tell. So certainly I think the entire mission, given the constraints of funding, is under-equipped. So it isn't just the SANDF that's under-equipped, it's also the other elements of the mission. So, when we're calling for a level of thought around how the mission is equipped, we're not referring only to the SANDF portion, but the entire mission. And the question of whether it has the right gear to ensure success and safety.
Mm-hmm. Is there any expectation that there could be support that comes from the United Nations Security Council? Because we see that Rwanda had written to the United Nations Security Council saying that it is objecting to its plans to support the military deployment. And I wonder what form of support would come from the United Nations Security Council with regards to this mission.
There was a request, particularly for funding, because obviously the UN mission has been asked to withdraw by the government of the DRC. So while they're still there in some numbers, they are gradually withdrawing their forces and whatnot. So the request is for funding. It may come, but if it does come, it will be backfilled probably in a few months to a year at best. In the meantime, the SANDF is funding its deployment out of its own budget, which is already highly strained. The Air Force is sitting with about 20% availability of its aircraft because it is so badly underfunded. So if that happens, and we hope it does, it can help, but certainly not fast. And it seems unlikely that there will be a significant contribution of funding from them. So the issue here is that we need the equipment now, and it isn't available and likely won't become available for some time, at best. So, for example, the Rofloks, although they'd be very useful, they're currently also having their own prices around availability. And so to return them to flight and make them available would take at least, 2 or 3 months. So it's, I think, a very tricky situation where the SANDF has been deployed at a critical stage where it is already struggling under a terribly low defense budget. Mm-hmm. We're hoping for support, but we deploy without that being available. So, this old saying, hope isn't a strategy.
Yeah, and again, the other thing is that looking at the MONUSCO mission and also the decision to have the troops start pulling out of the region, but also considering how long this insurgency and this battle has been continuing in the DRC, what difference would the SADC deployed mission make in the eastern part of the DRC that MONUSCO, with all of the support that it got from the various countries as well, was unable to attain?
I think that's an excellent question. It gets to the heart of the reason for deploying the mission. I think there's a belief that this force would be less static and more free to act than the UN mission, which was constrained by not only its own rules around when to intervene, but also certain countries were less willing to intervene to the same extent. So the hope is that given, this is a fully mobile and willing force that has more ability to act. I think it's still too small. It is much smaller than the UN force. And, of course, there's still limits as to what it can do, given the size and level of equipment. But primarily, first, the objective is just to defend Goma and Sake from attack. And I think that'll be hard enough as it is.
If the Commander-in-Chief of the SANDF were to call you now, right now, Darren, and ask for your advice, what would you say? Would you say pull out the troops?
If we cannot get more support and equipment available, and at the very least things like counter-rocket artillery and water systems, and then I think yes. But I think, first of all, much effort must be placed to try to get more support from other countries in SADC and try to backfill some of that lack that we have over there and have a much better chance of success of the mission and much lower level of risk to the troops.
Yeah. And the budget that was announced recently by the Minister of Finance, do you think it does go a long way to try and deal with the aspect around the tools that are required by the SANDF and also the maintenance of some of it?
Absolutely not. In real terms, it's a decline. It's a budget we were very worried about. And it is actually, really bad news. So at the same time as the SANDF is being required to increase its commitments with this mission and even the one that took place in Mozambique, there certainly is no big change in this budget. None of the things that we hoped for are there, and it will result in further decline of capabilities.
Thank you so much for your time. That was African Defence Review Director Darren Olivier. Really appreciate your time.